All right, we are in Nehemiah chapter 2 tonight. Nehemiah 2. All right. If you've read the book of Nehemiah before, which I presume probably most of you have, and certainly if you've been here on Wednesday nights, you already know that Nehemiah has been faced with a tremendous task. I mean, almost impossible to overcome the difficulties that he faced. But Nehemiah is the story of a great man overcoming those difficulties. And there's one big, huge secret to that success, and that is God. Without God, none of this would have been possible. So we see God's hand at work. We see God's hand just blessing Nehemiah and giving him favor, even with the king and how all that transpired, what we looked at last time. But tonight we're going to look at verses 9 through 20. And so I'm going to read those out loud. Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. Now, just think about that for a moment. Nehemiah shows up, he's got soldiers with him, he's got cavalry with him, and that he gives them the express purpose why he's there. And what is the governor's response? They're not happy about it, right? Yeah. What do you mean? We got these Israelites right where we want them. What do you mean you want to? Anyway, they're kind of upset because they want the welfare of Israel. So I went to Jerusalem and was there for 3 days. And I rose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate. And I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. Then I went up into the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. And I had not yet told the Jews, the priests and nobles and the officials, and the rest who were with me to do the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite, servant, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Then I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build. But you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. All right, so that takes us through chapter 2. Now again, the problem is getting the wall of Jerusalem rebuilt. It had been real close to 100 years since the walls of Jerusalem stood. And there have been about, at least the best way I can count it, there have been at least 4 attempts to rebuild. And every one of those attempts failed. So it's an overwhelming task. Best estimates at that time period, there's no solid consensus on the circumference of the city of Jerusalem at that time. It's anywhere from 1.5 miles to 2.5 miles. So think about that being the circle of Jerusalem, where the walls had to be built. The walls were totally destroyed. If you think about how Jerusalem sits, it's not a plain, right? It's up on a mountain, which means there's valleys and hills all through that region. Think about on some sides where that wall is, when those great stones were hurled down and tossed down, they went way down. So you have to have a lot of manpower, a lot of equipment to get those back up to where they need to be. And so moving massive stones is just an incredible task in itself. And so he would have needed many, many people to help with that. Part of the overwhelming task that it was is the people that were there had already experienced just a history of being defeated over and over and over again. And so they tried rebuilding, it failed, they gave up, they didn't see any success. And so just think about the morale as Nehemiah shows up, and just think about it. If he would have showed up and said, all right, guys, let's rebuild the wall. You think they would have listened? No. Probably not. But who's this guy, and what does he think he's doing coming in here and telling us what to do? So they had a history of defeat. Looking at some of the dates in 445 BC, this is when Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem. 445 BC. All the way back in 538 BC, so roughly 100 years, about 90 years, it was first tried. So 90 years earlier, when they rebuilt the temple, it took 15 years to get that done. Nehemiah is about to rebuild the wall with the few people that he has doing it. He's about to rebuild it in 52 days. So that's a humongous task there. Remember the second wave of exiles returned. You see, when the exiles were released from Babylon and what became Persia too, they went back in waves. So they didn't all just go back at one time. Nehemiah is part of a wave that comes, he takes some people with him too. He'll actually go back to Persia and then come back again. And you see that really throughout the book of Ezra as well. The most recent failure prior to Nehemiah showing up in Jerusalem was 13 years prior to this. So this is still fresh in a lot of people's minds. So they're very discouraged. And so these overwhelming tasks are opportunities for great people. And Nehemiah is what we see here. He's a great man. And that goes back to his relationship with God. Think about the people that really stand out in your life that have been men and women of faith. What makes them great? It's because of their relationship with God. So there's 6 elements I want to point out tonight about Nehemiah's success as a leader in getting this started. Remember, he's not even gotten to the work part yet. He's got to overcome just talking to the people first. Even though he's got the king's approval, he's got letters, he's got the permission to use any supplies that he needs. First thing he does is run into those governors, and what do they say? What do they think about Nehemiah? Even though he has the proof, right? These are some of the same people that got the king, that convinced the king earlier to not restore Jerusalem. To, in fact, hold them back, hold them down. So these people are looking at Nehemiah as a rebel. Like, you're not on the king's side. That's basically what they said there. So he runs into these problems. But first thing we see here, Nehemiah was a great planner. And we talked about this a little bit before, a couple weeks ago. He produced a good plan. And one of the key ingredients of that plan is that he was a man of prayer. He didn't just rush into anything. He prayed. And we talked about it, from the time he learned of the destruction of Jerusalem and the condition it was in, to the time he actually got to speak to the king, 4 or 5 months had passed by. So what he had been doing in all that time was planning. So he got the information, he developed the concept for how he rebuild the wall, he used the necessary information to develop a wise plan. Now, it's easy to put together a plan. Anybody can put together a plan. But putting together a wise plan, that takes some thought, to make sure everything's done in the right way. Then he had to implement the plan and motivate the people. Now, which do you think is probably harder? Implementing a plan or getting the people to actually do it? Getting the people to buy into it, right? So the second secret is Nehemiah's timing. Okay, the timing of this is important. On the one hand, if he had acted too quickly, then the people probably wouldn't have responded. He wouldn't have gotten all the information that he would needed to make a wise plan, and his ideas would have been just quickly dismissed. But on the other hand, if he promptly presented his plan, if he waited too long before presenting that, people wouldn't listen to him either. Like, well, what has he been doing all this time, right? So we see here, as we read, Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem. He waits 3 days before he does anything. Now that's pretty significant. To not even speak a word to anybody about why he's there. What would that generate? Now let's think about this for a moment. We live in a small town. Let's say some important official all of a sudden arrives. What looks to us as an important official. He's got an entourage of armed men and horses, and people are following him around, and he looks very important, but he doesn't say anything to anybody. Now, what would that do to us? What would
gossip meals, right?
The gossip meal, people are getting very interested, right?
Yeah.
Why is this guy here, and what is he going to do? So 3 days of this is going by. They're ready. So the timing's important here. And so if he had waited any longer, it wouldn't have worked. He would have lost the initiative that his prestige had given to him. Remember, he has been appointed governor by the king, and he's about to let everybody know this information and why he's there. By the end of the 3 days, his presence had aroused considerable curiosity, and so that was the moment he told them why he's there, why he left Susa, and why he's... now, think about this. From Susa to Jerusalem is 1,500 miles. It wasn't a light trip. So, again, why am I here? We're here to rebuild the wall. Then, the third thing we see here is Nehemiah addresses everybody. He doesn't just single out one person over here and take another group over here. He gets everybody together at the same time. Why do you think he would do that?
Well, everybody gets the same story.
Everybody gets the same information right up front, right? It's not, well, he said this over here, and no, that's not what I heard. Mm-hmm. No, everybody. And notice the groups that were addressed. Verse 16. It says the Jews, that's presumably just the crowds, right? The people. The priests were there. The nobles, this will be the rich, the nobility. The officials, this will be the governors and the servants to the governors and so forth. And the rest who were to do the work. So all the workers. He called a convocation together so he can present this information and present this plan. And each person got to hear him and make up his or her own mind what to think about it. All right? Were they going to accept this challenge? No one had an opportunity to misinterpret or mishear because everybody was hearing it together. And so that's what he does. He addresses them, and when he addresses them, he throws down a challenge. What was that challenge? Starting in verse 17. What does he want them all to do?
Build the wall.
Build the wall.
So they no longer suffer.
That's right. So they don't suffer derision and being made fun of by all the nations around them. So that kind of plays into something else we'll talk about in just a minute. But the fourth thing we see here that kind of plays into his success is he identifies with them in the task. Nehemiah didn't show up and say, you got to do this and you got to do this. No, he says we, us. He really talks about that, especially in verse 17. He said, I said to them, you see the trouble, who's in? We are in. How Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the walls. So Nehemiah is totally identifying himself with the trouble. He's identifying himself with the people. He's identifying himself with the work. Now, how well does it go when you have a boss come in and say, you all need to do this work while I go relax or go on vacation? Yeah, people don't really respond well to that. But Nehemiah jumps right in and does the work, as we'll see in time. So he identifies with them. And just think about for a moment, if he didn't do that, he probably, again, would not have gotten anywhere. Every single one of these things, every step he takes was great potential for failure. And yet we see God's hand completely on him. Fifth thing we see here is Nehemiah used internal motivation. Now, this is contrasted with external motivation. External motivation, for example, would be, we'll pay you more money if you can get this work done. And what the interesting thing is, you would think that would work. But the people who have really studied this and looked into this thing, they say external motivation doesn't really motivate people to do better. In fact, it just makes them worse because they think, well, if he's going to give me this, maybe I should ask for this. And it actually, in the end, doesn't work out. So that's an example of external motivation. What would internal motivation be? What does he use here? What does he tell them? Does he promise them success? Does he promise them rewards? No. Does he promise them that they'll get all this glory? No. He didn't promise anything. But what does he lean into? He leans into their nationalistic pride. You are Jewish. And look at the condition of the city of God. That's basically what he's saying to them. You live here and you let this be like this? So he really appeals to their sense of religion and pride and all that's wrapped into it, because he says, come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. Okay? And so what do they say? He says, I told them, this is verse 18, I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they're ready by that point. Yeah, they heard his speech, they heard his plan, all that stuff, but they're ready. Now, one example I thought of immediately when I was looking at Nehemiah is Winston Churchill during World War II. Now, he's famous for his speeches. He's quoted all the time for the things he said, but when you look at what he said to the British Empire, when there was no guarantee of success, right? They didn't know they were going to win the war. This was before America even entered the war. His speech that he gave to motivate the British people, he didn't promise them that they were going to win. He promised no success. He promised no victories. But what did he say? We're gonna fight.
Never.
Yeah, he said never give up, never quit. But he said we're gonna fight them on the beaches. We're gonna fight them in the sea. We're gonna fight them in the air. We're gonna keep on fighting. And then maybe, and he references America, maybe the new world will get involved. But he didn't promise anything.
When he made that speech I was talking about, that's the only thing he said. He went up to the podium. I used this Sunday in one of my sermons. Yeah.
See, Winston Churchill is quoted all the time.
Yeah, he went up to the podium and he stood up in the audience there, and that's the only thing he said. He says, never give up, and then he went and sat down. It took him a little while, and all of a sudden they realized what the man said, and they started rising and giving him a standing ovation.
Oh yeah. Yeah, those are important things to pay attention to.
In both cases, I see where he made it personal.
Absolutely.
This is not just, no, this is about us.
Yeah, it's not like he just rolled into town and said, you know what, this is an idea I had, maybe we could get this done. No, it wasn't that at all, was it? It was we have to do this. We can't let this go on any further. So he played on their noble instinct and their patriotism, and it was their earthly citizenship that motivated them. Now, let's just pause right there from Nehemiah and let's think about our citizenship. And not our national citizenship, not our earthly citizenship, but where is our real citizenship? It's in heaven. Right. That's what Philippians talks about. Paul talks about that in Philippians. We have a heavenly citizenship, right? Which should take priority over any other allegiance that we have. That's what and it's held for us. What should have more motivation on us? Our earthly citizenship or our heavenly citizenship?
Heavenly.
Right. So, why do we deal so much with people just not really getting involved with godly things, with doing what God wants, with even caring, really. I mean, why do we see so much apathy even in the church? And there's no real, I'm not looking for one particular answer or anything. I'm just throwing that out there.
They don't have that's what I said earlier. It is not a personal thing to them. It is something that's within them. They just see it.
Right.
It's just something, but they haven't taken any ownership in it.
Yeah. And like you said, it hadn't become personal.
Mm-hmm.
When it becomes personal, then you pour all that you are into it.
And the other, it's a lot of people react to something tangible, something that they can see and understand. They look at that and I go, I don't understand what the big deal is.
Right.
In this.
Right.
It's hard to be motivated to participate.
Yeah. It's very freeing, but it's also it almost overwhelms you when you come to that point where you just decide, I'm going to do what I do because I love Christ.
Amen.
For no other reason, for no other applaud or glory or whatever else. You just serve Christ. That's very freeing. And anyway, heavenly citizenship should be a motivating factor on us in our life here on this earth. The final thing we see tonight is Nehemiah kept the people informed. Now this is another key ingredient to his leadership. As they were making progress, he told the people, we're making progress. As every little thing happened, he kept them informed. Look, even at verse 18, he says, I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. So he starts, when he tells them why he's there, who he is, why he's there, what they're going to do, he starts by telling them, look, I've already been through these steps. God has put this on my heart to do. He's paved the way for it every step of the way. By the way, the king has basically given me his complete blessing in doing this, which when the people heard that, they would have really paid attention. Because this is the same king that was against them before. Like, what? And it's almost hard to believe, right? A complete reversal of what happened there. Now, Martin Luther, throughout the Reformation, did a very similar thing. Now, Martin Luther was just a man. He was not perfect. But one of the things he did well through the Reformation is he kept the people informed of what was happening. He didn't keep anybody in the dark. He let everybody know, what was happening throughout. And that's a sign of a good leader. It's not being done in the corner. It's not being hidden behind doors. He's there with the people. He's there for the people. And that's one of the things we can point to in this chapter. Now, is there anything that y'all saw that y'all want to add or maybe even ask about? Well, your homework is to read chapter 3 and start pronouncing those names. There's a lot of names in there. There's a lot of names.
I mean, he obviously, his heart was completely in it, and being able to convey that to the people.
That's right.
Very important.
To a people that was defeated over and over again and had no motivation, to see them all of a sudden say, well, let's build a wall. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I mean, we're just getting the bits and pieces, right? We just get to see this little tiny glimpse, and it looks like such a quick thing, but there's so many steps that had to take place, and every single one of those steps had to be successful to get to the big part, to get to the wall being rebuilt. And that you can only give, just like Nehemiah does here, you can only give credit to God. He was up front with them, like, this is not me, this is all God's hand. So that's something we need to remember too in our lives. As we talk to people, this is God's hand, the favor.